All right, so I will have this hopefully recorded for you. All right, this week, midterm. With your midterm, this is going to cover chapters 1 through 6 and 20, and then chapter 18, just the diabetes and heart disease portion of this in the for that. Do it in MindTap. It is 50 questions. You have 105 minutes to do it. So you'll have the same amount of time to do it as you would if you were actually taking it in class. And then we'll review at the end there for that. As far as what we're covering from topic 4, I'm not going to cover energy balance and body composition because that's going to be something we get into next week, and that won't be on your midterm. And then for the energy metabolism bit, we won't go over the actual bioenergetics today because, again, that's not going to be on your midterm, and it's kind of a more complex thing to do than just try to cover it in like one, 30-minute session kind of thing. So today we are primarily going to do a little bit on diet and health, and then get into eating disorders and disordered eating. So let's get right into it. We finished off last time with antioxidants. So remember that antioxidants are antioxidizers. And I know I just said we weren't talking about metabolism, but antioxidants, or free radicals for that matter, are byproducts of metabolism. So whenever you metabolize something, you are going to generate waste products. Waste products from metabolism come in the form of free radicals. All the free radicals are molecules that have an unpaired electron. So they have a charge, they're an ion. And when something has a charge, it likes to neutralize itself. So free radicals can be perfectly benign, or they can cause stuff like, say, cellular damage if you have enough of them. So you have antioxidants, which will go and donate an electron to one of these to make a complete valence shell. So a typical valence shell has 8 electrons on the outermost shell. And that antioxidant will go donate that, neutralize the free radical, you're all good to go. Common antioxidants, you'll see things like many of your vitamins, like vitamin C, vitamin E, you would consider as antioxidants. And the reason why you have antioxidants is because you have to oxidize much of your macronutrients to get ATP from them. So granted, you can get ATP from glucose via glycolysis anaerobically, so without oxygen, but that's only a very small amount of it. You can also oxidize glucose, so you can oxidize the glycogen into glucose, send that down into Krebs cycle to electron transport chain. Same thing with fats. All fats have to be oxidized. Think about when you are using fat, what term do you use to say, like, I'm using fat?
Calories.
So like if you go to the gym and you talk about calories, what are you saying you did with those calories? You burn them, right? And that isn't all that unrealistic or inappropriate of a term to use, because when you oxidize them, they give off heat. Any oxidation reaction, usually what I do around this time is I will do my elephant toothpaste demonstration where I will mix some potassium permanganate with dish soap and concentrated, what the heck is the thing? Hydrogen peroxide, there we go. And it turns into this big old foamy mess. but it's also very, very hot. So you wouldn't think taking peroxide and the permanganate, which is just essentially like a dust kind of thing, you actually can use that as a disinfectant for water. So like if you put that, like a half a capful of it in a gallon of water, it will actually make the water potable. Many of your bottled waters will have magnesium in it. And magnesium not only is going to enhance the flavor, but it also helps to make water potable. Now, granted, when you have like bottled water, you obviously have that, purified in some way. But if you were like in a survival situation and you happen to have your chemistry lab with you, you could make your water potable by mixing in potassium permanganate. And the whole reason it gets really hot is because the permanganate gets oxidized by the peroxide. It's kind of like if you ever put peroxide on like a cut, it bubbles up, it's oxidizing it. Now, granted, it doesn't have that same effect of like having a massive amount of heat attached to it, but it's still oxidizing it. When you oxidize something, you're giving off heat. So imagine like you're burning something like a fire, smoke comes off of it, right? And do you want to be inhaling smoke? Not really. The smoke is essentially your free radicals. And then you need your antioxidizers or your antioxidants to go and neutralize that. Now, granted, you don't ever really go and trap the smoke you give off from a fire somewhere and neutralize it, but it gets neutralized, like say in the atmosphere. So you kind of get the idea there. This whole big hair thing, it prevents you from damaging your cells. If you had a high amount of free radicals with few or little available antioxidants, it would cause cellular damage. Cellular damage by itself isn't necessarily bad, but when those cells then start multiplying, that becomes really bad. That's when you get like something like a mutation occurring. And some mutations can be really good, some can be benign, others can be deadly. Now, shifting gears here into alcohol, everyone's favorite thing in the world. We've talked already about how alcohol contains calories. When you take a gram of alcohol, and by alcohol here I'm referring to ethanol. So if you see ETOH, that is ethanol. Ethanol makes you happy, methanol makes you sad. And for every gram of ethanol, there is 7 calories attached to it. But remember, we can't digest alcohol. You have to metabolize it. You metabolize it through the liver. And we'll see how that works here next. A 12-ounce beer, 8 to 9 ounces of malt liquor. I don't know how many people, let alone college students, are drinking malt liquor. The only ones I can think of are like Mickey's Malt Liquor and Old English, and both of those, if you've ever tried them, which I know you haven't because you're good kids, makes you want to kind of never drink alcohol again kind of thing. So I don't know how many people are drinking that, but needless to say, same equivalency for this. About 5 ounces of red wine, 6 to 8 ounces of white wine, 8 ounces of white wine, there we go. And then 1.5 ounces of an 80 proof spirit or liquor, all contain about 100 calories each. Now, and by regular beer, this would be like your typical light beer. If you're talking about craft beers or whatever, those can be in the hundreds of calories because they have all different flavors and sugars and junk in them. So whenever you see like a beer commercial, it says only has 2 grams of carbs. That's completely meaningless. There's going to be a small amount of carbs in it because there's going to be, unfermented sugars in there, but it's negligible. All your calories, for all intents and purposes, come from the alcohol itself, which we can't use. So whenever you drink alcohol, it essentially goes directly into fat. Now, side note, you know that, alcohol has a bunch of negative things that can happen from it. You look at, like, say, even red wine. Red wine has some antioxidant properties to it, but the amount of it that you would have to drink to really get a positive benefit would be negated by the amount of alcohol that you're actually consuming. You know that drinking is going to essentially slow down all bodily function kind of thing. So your decision making, your reaction time, all that good stuff. But the thing that's actually much more applicable to all of you is how alcohol affects your brain. Now, granted, if you were, say, a heavy drinker all through college, like chronically doing that, you could really give yourself essentially brain damage because your brain is still developing. Not until you're around your mid-20s do you actually have your brain fully developed. So it's very easy to get an addiction in college because the availability of the stuff, as well as the lack of full brain development, makes addiction a lot easier. That aside, alcohol interferes with your REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, meaning that if you're not getting REM sleep, you're not able to convert short-term memories into long-term ones. So if you go and you start studying tonight, or today even, and then you go have a bender tonight, most likely you are going to forget everything you studied. So if you're going to be partying, do not party and study. If you want to be efficient, do like some homework or something like that. But if you're trying to straight up just study, you don't want to be partying. So either party all day or don't do it at all. Now, one good thing about ethanol specifically is that it is a lipid solvent, meaning that it will dissolve fats. Well, that's a really good thing, because this is why you have alcohol as one of your main ingredients for many of your household cleaners. Even if you somehow ingested alcohol from, like, say, rubbing alcohol, which I hope you don't, because that's isopropyl alcohol and that's going to taste terrible. Unless you really were downing a whole bunch of it, it's not going to really harm you. But again, it's not something I would go out of my way to do. But that, because it's a lipid solvent, it will dissolve cell membranes. If you have the cell membrane of, like, say, a pathogen, that will essentially kill it. That's why so many viruses, bacteria, other pathogens really can't survive in alcohol. And why you see many of your, like, disinfectants, your hand sanitizers, that thing, have a high concentration of alcohol in it. Even if you look at, say, like mouthwash typically is about 22 proof-ish. So yeah, alcohol or mouthwash has quite a bit of ethanol in it. And again, that is not, it's really to kill bacteria. I was reading a study that said that mouthwash can potentially, I forget how they termed it, but it wasn't like kill COVID, but like neutralize it somehow. I have to look that back up again. You also can get a DUI from gargling mouthwash. So if you gargle mouthwash and immediately go drive, make sure you don't get pulled over, because your blood alcohol content can get like as high as like 0.10, just because of the local amount of ethanol that will stick around in there for a little while. Yeah, so the more you know. Now, if I'm trying to kill a pathogen, that's great. Like, you want that to dissolve. But unfortunately, it kind of has the same effect on us to a less extent. I mean, obviously, if you drink alcohol, it's not going to, erode your intestines from drinking one time. But if you ever drink, like especially something that's very high proof, you feel a burning sensation. And again, I know none of you have ever done that, but if you have something that's very high proof, it burns kind of. And that's because partially of this really lipid solvent property that it has. If you drink alcohol chronically, so like if you were a chronic alcoholic, among other things, it would start eroding your esophagus over time. So you can actually get, similar type effects of, like say, Barrett's esophagus, where you have a faulty esophageal sphincter causing much like stomach acid to come out and erode the distal end of your esophagus. You get that same kind of thing happening with alcohol consumption. And surprise, surprise, you can, there's an increase in the instances of throat cancer from excessive alcohol consumption. So like everything, moderation is key. Now, in the liver, this is what happens and how we actually are going to use alcohol. If this weren't alcohol, so if this were just regular calories, it would go through a process here in the liver of refining, eventually leading to acetyl-CoA, which we would send to the Krebs cycle. However, because this is alcohol, and because we can't directly go to the Krebs cycle from the liver there, you have to turn this into an unusable form of acetyl-CoA. This is the same thing as if we had, like, say, a sugar substitute. So if I had, like, say, aspartame, where my body would think that it's sugar, but then it realizes it's not, it realizes it can't use it. Same thing happens here. This isn't a usable form of acetyl-CoA. So all of the acetyl-CoA you generate from the breakdown or the metabolism of alcohol in the liver has to go into fats before it can be used. So you convert all alcohol calories into triglycerides before they can actually be used. So all alcohol gets stored as fat. Now, because you have this bit here where it runs into a dead end, how do you think that's going to affect your metabolism overall?
Does it slow it down with the stopping?
Yeah, it's going to slow it down. It's like if you were trying to leave the classroom here and you went to that door and it were locked, what would you have to do to get out of the classroom? Yeah, go to the back door. And is that quicker or longer?
Longer.
Longer, yeah. That's what's happening here. You go to a dead end and then you have to reverse track and go back another way. Slows everything down. So your metabolism slows down when you are consuming alcohol. Now, this other bit here I have at the end, what if you're drinking on a full stomach or an empty stomach? How does that affect you? Well, what do you think? Yeah. So if you have stuff in your stomach, the alcohol will absorb or mix along with it. And it'll take longer for it to enter your bloodstream. If you have nothing in your stomach or relatively little in your stomach, alcohol is a pretty fast path into the bloodstream. Because alcohol has a evaporation point that is much lower than, like, say, water, it'll be absorbed a lot faster once it gets inside you. So if you have stuff in your stomach to absorb it, to like soak it up, it'll dissipate over time. This can be tricky though, because if you are, say, like drinking and you have a relatively full stomach, you could essentially not feel drunk when you have drank enough to be drunk. And then as that alcohol gets released, it's going to continually increase your blood alcohol concentration. What can be dangerous is if you continue drinking, not realizing that you've already consumed enough, and then that's when you can get into like dangerously high blood alcohol content levels. You metabolize alcohol at the rate of roundabout 0.015 to 0.02 blood alcohol content units per hour. Each drink, so each of those drinks we had from back here, raises your BAC by about 0.02. So you have to figure that about every drink you have takes 1 hour to get out of your body. And then the more you drink, the longer it takes. If you have any kind of compromised liver function, either through like say fat deposits, so if you had like fatty liver disease, if you had cirrhosis of the liver, which is scarring of the liver, if you had liver cancer, all of that is going to drastically slow down the metabolic function of the liver. If you were at end-stage cirrhosis, a single drink could take you roughly 48 hours to metabolize. Instead of someone with a healthy liver, it would take about an hour. That's quite a long time. And the longer you have alcohol in your system, the more adverse effects that can happen. This here is another big thing that happens. Remember, the liver is going to produce bile, right? If the liver is busy metabolizing alcohol, it's going to take a lot longer for it to produce bile. And this is why after you drink a lot, the next day you tend to have like say a loose stool. And it's because you have less bile production, less emulsification of the bolus or of your food stuff. So you tend to have more loose stools immediately after drinking because of that. And then with the brain, you see here the two different showings of an alcoholic and a normal 43-year-old brain. Alcoholism will essentially shrink your brain. So you've probably heard the old adage that alcohol kills brain cells kind of thing. There is a grain of truth to that. I mean, a single bout of drinking isn't going to, damage your brain kind of thing unless you drink so much that you probably would kill yourself. But chronic alcoholism is going to break down your brain tissue. And that's why people who are deep into alcoholism tend to have symptoms that would mimic dementia or Alzheimer's because their brain is literally breaking down. It's not the same route, you're taking a different route to it, but the same kind of end result. The brain is essentially destroying itself. And then there's your BAC levels and what happens. And then with hangovers, big thing with hangovers is this bit right here, congeners. Congeners are your byproducts from the distillation process, typically. While, say, dehydration is going to play a little bit of a role in a hangover, the major thing is these congeners. Congeners are your methanol byproducts. Remember, methanol makes you sad. If you drink methanol, even in small quantities, it will give you a headache. If you drink, say, an equivalent amount of methanol that you would ethanol, you will go blind and die. And it's all because your body cannot metabolize methanol the same way it does ethanol. even though they are very, very close together chemically, the little bit of differences that you do have in the positioning of the molecule or the structure of the molecule makes it so that its interaction with your body is not good. Where you actually apply that is the darker the spirit, the more congeners that are in it. So bourbon is your worst offender. The most amount of methanol you will find is in bourbon. The least amount of methanol you'll find is in your clear spirits. So like your vodka, your gin, especially your like triple distilled kind of stuff. You'll be able to drink the most of that with the least amount of hangover effects. So if you don't want to be hungover, drink clear drinks. You're welcome. All right, so that's everything I wanted to cover from that. And now I wanted to jump into eating disorders and disordered eating. All right, we talked about this already last week in terms of healthy weight loss. When you are losing weight, you typically want to shoot for about 1 to 2 pounds a week. Remember, how many calories are in a pound?
3,500.
3,500, okay? If I'm losing 1 pound, for every 7 days, I need to be burning 3,500 calories. So that comes out to 500 calories per day. If I'm losing 2 pounds, that's going to be 1,000 calorie per day deficit I need to be at. What are the only 2 ways that I can reduce calories or get to a calorie deficit? There's only 2 ways you can
Limit your daily intake.
eat less. And what's the other way?
Burn more.
Move more. The only 2 ways you get rid of calories. Now, I guess technically you could take like some medicines or drugs. We've talked about, being on the meth diet. So if you're not concerned about, tooth loss or other, psychotic effects, meth might be for you. So for normal weight loss, eat less, move more. Well, what happens if I try to do more than this? So what happens if I try to increase this number?
You're not going to be eating enough to like energize your body, I guess. You're going to have to like reduce your calorie intake or work out more, I guess, or move more.
You're on the right track there. If I am, like, let's say you go to the gym and you work out even hard, do you notice like a major change in your body structure after just one workout? No, and it's because your body can't burn all that many calories, let alone fat calories, to give you any noticeable effects. I mean, yeah, you might be a little bit thinner because of sweat or water loss, but as soon as you replenish your fluids, it's going to come right back on. If I try to burn too many calories or try to lose too much weight in a given week, my body can't keep up with it. We'll see here in a couple slides, we have this thing called a set point theory. Your body likes the way it is. If you try to tax it too hard, it's going to push back against you. It does that by either making you lower your metabolism or by causing you to lose non-fat weight. So fat-free mass would be either like, say, muscle mass, bone density, or more likely water. I can go and lose 10 pounds today if I wanted to. I just go sweat it all out. But as soon as I drink something, it's going to come right back on. And realistically, if I'm that dehydrated, how well do you think I'm gonna feel? Yeah. So that's why that about 2 pounds roughly per week is the max for your sweet spot, because that's the most amount of weight your body is kind of willing to lose in fat mass, or mostly fat mass, during the course of a given week. How about if I go the other way? What if I'm doing less than 1 pound? Now what's happening?
You're just gonna stay the same because you're not losing anything, like less than 1 pound.
Yeah, you're just being inefficient. So, and again, this all goes back to if you're actively trying to lose weight and you're trying to lose weight in a healthy way. There's no real big issue with losing less than 1 pound a week. Slow and steady wins the race, right? The bigger issue comes with trying to do too much too quickly. Okay, macronutrients. Again, remember, what are my recommended daily intakes for my macronutrients? What percentage of my total caloric intake should be from each?
45 to 65 for carbohydrates.
Fats.
20 to 35.
And what's the caveat with fats?
Less than 10% of that should be saturated fat.
Yes. And then proteins?
10 to 25.
There you go. Perfect. When you consume carbs and dietary protein, these are considered your protein-sparing macronutrients, meaning that your body will turn to these first to convert to ATP over using stored stuff. Remember, you can't store protein. So once you hit your body's threshold for what you can consume with protein or use for proteins, your body's going to start converting it to fat or using it for energy if that's a possibility. So if you are consuming carbs and proteins, that is going to help your body to preserve the muscle mass you have, especially while you're trying to lose weight. So as long as you have carbs available, your body is going to be able to avoid breaking down your proteins or your muscle mass to fill in the ATP gap. That's especially important when trying to lose weight because muscle is a lot more metabolically active than, say, like fat, meaning just for muscle to exist on its own, it burns more calories. Remember, if you have, like, say, malnutrition, your body is going to go into kind of a starvation mode. So you're going to lower your metabolic rate, and it does that by shutting down your muscles first. That's why you'll see a lot of muscle wasting. All right, just like I said with set point theory, your body likes the way it is. What this is showing is how body mass changed based on a calorie change. So originally, this first week, these people were consuming roughly a 3,500 calorie per day diet, and then they dropped down to about 500 calories per day. The purple line up here is what their actual weight loss was. The orange line was what it was supposed to be, based on if I take off X amount of calories, I should lose X amount of weight. Because remember, 3,500 calories in a pound, so if I reduce my caloric intake by, roughly 3,000 calories a day, I should be burning about 6 pounds a week, but I'm not. And why is that? What do you think is happening there? So if I drop that many calories, I'm essentially putting myself into a starvation mode. And again, when you go into starvation mode, your body is going to want to protect itself and try to maintain survival. It does that by first reducing your metabolism. It shuts down your major metabolic actors, so your muscles. That's why you're not burning nearly or losing nearly as much weight as what you would be predicted, because your body fights back against it. This is also why, again, you don't go burn 500 calories on the treadmill and all of a sudden your gut's gone, kind of thing. Adaptations over time. This is the primary explanation for it, is this oxygen uptake. Not that you need to know it because it's more of an exercise phys topic, but 1 liter of oxygen equals about 5 calories. So if I am uptaking less oxygen, I'm burning less calories. And this is a signal that your metabolism is slowing down. An oxygen uptake doesn't mean like I'm breathing less or anything like that. It means that my body is not using the oxygen I do have, or it's using less of it. This here shows how kind of proper diet and exercise will change your body composition over time. If you just want to drop your weight number, diet's the way to go. Because if you're dieting, or just like restricting calories, you're going to lose a lot of body mass, but you're also going to lose fat-free mass, which you really don't want to do. If you just exercise, exercise will do really well for changing body composition, not so much with moving the weight number. Because exercise will essentially make you gain more muscle mass while losing about the same amount of fat mass. Now, granted, when you are talking about, say, losing weight, you're not really talking about dropping the weight number per se. You're talking about losing fat. So if you combine the two, you're actually getting a better than the sum of the parts result. Because not only do you preserve your muscle mass, but you lose an even greater amount of fat mass. Either change you make is going to be beneficial to you in some way or another, as long as you're not overdoing it. But to get the best results for weight loss, you have to combine diet and exercise. The saying is that you can't outrun your diet. So ultimately, if the diet doesn't change, the weight doesn't change, at least in the long term. All right, we've talked about different fat types before. Remember, you have 2 types of fat. You have your adipose tissue, or your subcutaneous fat, and your visceral fat. Visceral fat is going to be the storage fat you have. This is your, your gut kind of thing. Essential fat is your visceral fat. This is the stuff that's deeper inside you. It's going to, like, say, line your many of your organs, helps to, like, say, make up things like your cell walls, all that good stuff. For your essential fat, men need about 2 to 4%, women need about 7 to 9%. If you get below those numbers, you do run the risk of, like, say, organ failure and things like that. Your heart tends to be overworked when you get a lot, like, dangerously low levels of fat in you. So you always have to have some fat. Now, what's the difference here between, you think, lean body mass and fat-free mass? If you have a lean cut of meat, what usually comes to mind?
A little amount of fat.
Yeah, it's going to be mostly fat-free. Lean body mass typically refers to muscle mass, whereas fat-free mass is any non-fat mass. So that can be things like your organs, your skin, your bones. So when we're losing fat-free mass, that's typically not a good thing. However, if you are losing fat-free mass, you want to limit that to really just your skeletal muscle. I mean, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but it's a lot easier to build up skeletal muscle than it is to, say, rebuild bone. Once you hit a certain point with bone density, you can't rebuild it. So when you get to a position called osteoporosis, your body's unable to essentially regenerate your bones in a meaningful way. And that's when you become much more susceptible, like fractures. Here's our body composition chart here. So this shows what you would look like based on percentage of body fat. All right, now I want to get into eating disorders and disordered eating. When I talk about eating disorders, what kind of comes to mind?
Just having a poor relationship with food. I guess you could say, like, example would be like anorexia, like bulimia.
Yeah. How long do those things last?
A long time.
Yeah. So if I'm talking about an eating disorder, you're talking about a chronic condition. So you're looking at typically 3 to 6 months or more. If I talk about disordered eating, that is typically an individual event. The people who are most likely to have disordered eating are going to be my weight class athletes. Anyone that needs to cut weight for a weight class is usually the population that is at biggest risk of disordered eating. Because imagine you have to weigh in for your wrestling match. And you know ahead of time that you weigh, 3 pounds over the limit. Can you safely lose 3 pounds in, say, an hour? Not really. So you go and you sweat it out, lose all that water weight, and you make weight. Well, what's the problem with that?
So you're basically like pushing your body when you don't have the energy to do so.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting rid of a lot of water weight, you're dehydrating yourself, and then you're asking yourself to go perform at a high level. When you think of weight class athletes, what kind of sports come to mind? Wrestling, fighting, boxing,
Which is very tiring.
combat sports, right? Mostly combat sports you're thinking. I don't know about you, but if I'm dehydrated, I don't know how well my body is going to be operating, let alone, how easy is it to fight someone when your body's not optimally prepared? That can be a major problem. If you try to say rehydrate yourself, what can be the issue with that? So let's say you've cut the weight, you've done your weigh-in. Now let's say you have, I don't know, an hour until your match. What's the problem with trying to rehydrate? Well, I mean, you've already weighed in, so your weight's locked in. So it doesn't really matter what you do.
I don't know if your body can absorb that amount of water in that short.
Exactly. Digestion and absorption takes time. You can cut out some of that time if you did like an IV drip, but even still, you can't shove fluids into your veins at a super fast rate. You're going to absorb at roughly the same rate drinking versus IV fluids. The only benefit to an IV is it bypasses digestion, meaning like if you have an upset stomach, it's going to bypass that. But still, you can't just, like I say, dump liters and liters of fluids into you super quick. It still takes time to do that. You're not going to be able to take in and use as many fluids as what you most likely needed to drop to make your weight class. So again, very problematic there. Now, with eating disorders, we'll look at several different ones here. Now, you said about when you think of eating disorders, you think of an unhealthy relationship with food. What would you say is the main characteristic of people who have an eating disorder? What is their main goal? Body image, right? You typically have a distorted view of what your body image should be. If you see people that are even, in end stage anorexia, they'll, be skin and bones, like looking like a walking skeleton, but still say, oh, I have fat here and I see fat there. And it's because you have this distorted body image. How would you then classify most cases of eating disorders?
Psychological?
Yeah. Most of the time, an eating disorder is considered a psychological disease. Now, yes, obviously there are physiological effects, but those are kind of your secondary effects. You wouldn't have the problem if you didn't have the psychological component to it. We'll see how this is a little bit different in terms of, like, say, binge eating disorder, and how that is kind of separate there. So our big three in terms of eating disorders are going to be anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating. Anorexia is just self-starvation or the absence of calories. The only difference between bulimia and binge eating is this right here. Bulimia has a purging component. You purge in two ways, or one of two ways, or some combination of both. You either expel the food or you burn it off. You expel it through either vomiting or through things like, say, diuretics or laxatives, things like that, stuff to like push it straight through you. Or you do excessive exercise. Compulsive overeating does not involve a purge. In terms of body appearance, what are each of these three going to look like? So if you have anorexia, what are you looking like?
Very skinny.
Yes. Binge eating disorder,
Large on the larger side.
usually. How about bulimia?
Probably like normal.
Usually. No, I don't know how to draw a normal person. All right, you might have lymphedema, but that's okay. It's pretty easy to look at somebody's body structure and say, wow, you are skin and bones, or you are very sturdy looking, we'll call it. But if I look at any of you, you're all of normal body structure. Like no one here has any kind of huge red flags that something's going on, right? How is that problematic then with bulimia?
You're not able to distinguish if a person is binging and purging.
You can't tell usually. Now, we'll see that there's other things that you can definitely notice about it. But for the most part, if you just look at somebody's outward appearance, someone who has bulimia tends to look pretty normal body-wise. Now, again, this is kind of a stereotype, but I think you get the idea here. The major dangers with bulimia come in the form of the purge. Whenever any of you have thrown up, how have you felt? Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but like throwing up is not a fun thing. And plus, you got to remember, what exactly are you throwing up?
Hydrochloric acid.
Yeah, all your stomach contents and some of your upper, intestines. Not your intestines themselves, but the contents inside them. That'd be really terrible if you threw up your intestines. So stomach juices are going to have acid in them. That's not a good thing. It also puts a huge strain on your heart when you do that. If you ever notice, your blood pressure shoots way up when you throw up. That's why like many people can get like even nosebleeds from throwing up, because your blood pressure shoots way up when you do that. If you shoot your blood pressure way up and drop it, think about the repetitive stress that puts on your heart, and not in a good way. It's not like you're exercising kind of thing. On top of that, how much that stomach acid can erode everything from your esophagus up. And you've got really a pretty bad combination of effects there. Anytime you consume food, you will absorb calories. If you are someone who is bulimic, you're typically consuming large portions of food. I've seen people with bulimia consume anywhere from like 20 to 40 pounds of food a day, and then purge all of that. So you're still getting calories, but the amount of purging you have to do is going to be hugely detrimental on your body overall. If you get to kind of like that end stage anorexia, this becomes difficult to treat because your body is essentially used to having little to no calories available. And just like we saw with that set point theory, where your body likes where it's at, when you change your set point, your body then says, I don't want to leave there. So I don't want to go either way, up or down. I want to stay where I'm at. So if I'm at end stage anorexia and I give you, you know, whatever, a Crunchwrap Supreme from Taco Bell, even if you want to eat it, what do you think is going to happen if you do consume that?
Your body's going to reject it.
Most likely. This is what makes that so difficult to treat, because you have to essentially reintroduce foods to your body in a very, very small amount. This is why, like, if you are ever in a survival kind of situation, you know, you look at like The Naked and Afraid or whatever, those other kind of survival shows. After you spend a prolonged period of time, even just a couple weeks with limited caloric intake, and you try to like engorge yourself, you're most likely going to throw up, because your body is just not used to having all that available, and it's going to put too much strain on your body. That's why you want to be doing like slow and steady incremental reintroduction of foods kind of thing. Now, we talked about how, you know, this 3 to 6 month period is what really is going to classify you as having an eating disorder. Disordered eating by itself does not mean you have an eating disorder. If you have an eating disorder, you have disordered eating. Disordered eating can progress to an eating disorder if left unchecked. Now, like I said, usually when you talk about disordered eating, you're talking about like typically weight class athletes, but it's not exclusive to them. You know, let's say, and I really don't mean to kind of be discriminatory against females, but women tend to have a much, much higher instance of eating disorders than men do. But let's say, for example, you're a female who wants to lose weight for a particular occasion. Think about, like, I don't know, going on vacation, fitting into a wedding dress or some dress or something. It's not that unrealistic to think that if you didn't set yourself up to achieve that goal in a healthy fashion, that you could potentially go from reaching that goal in an unhealthy way to then continuing those unhealthy habits. And again, I don't want to make it sound like that anyone that tries to lose weight or anyone that has any instances of disordered eating is automatically going to get an eating disorder. But that's how the progression goes. You don't just all of a sudden develop an eating disorder one day. You know, it's not like you just like catch it overnight. It's a progression. You have to start out with disordered eating before you get to the actual eating disorder. That kind of makes sense. And I know when you talk about any of these kind of things, I mean, they are sensitive topics. So, you know, I try to present it in as an objective and dispassionate way as I can. This here is the more concerning stat that I saw when I originally made this. I can think of a bunch of different instances where someone has commented on either my appearance or somebody else's appearance around me in terms of your body composition in a negative light. Many times you aren't going to kind of self-judge unless somebody else has kind of implanted that into you. For the most part, unless there is some sort of either real or perceived judgment on body appearance, you're not going to consider body appearance as being something that is wrong. And I hope I'm explaining this in kind of a somewhat clear way. But do you guys know the allegory of the cave, Plato's cave? Have you ever watched The Matrix? So the allegory of the cave is that theoretically you would have all these people that live in a cave, and they're essentially strapped down, whatever, and all they can see is shadow images on a wall. And that's all they're ever able to see. Well, to them, that is their reality, right? Because they don't know anything else. And then if you set them free into the world, and all of a sudden they realize their life was a lie kind of thing, and you see that they have this whole actual big world in there, it then makes you question what your reality actually is. Same thing with the Matrix. The Matrix premise of it was that everything in the world was just a computer simulation, and humans were just hooked up to all these, like, whatever, essentially in a induced coma to get energy out of them. And they were in a constant dream state. And then if they ever woke up and realized that their whole life was just a simulation, that again makes you question your whole existence kind of thing. If you were in that first state, so the dream state, is anything ever wrong? I mean, no, because you don't have any perceptions that anything's wrong. But let's say someone introduces a problem into that. Now you see how that makes you think that things can be wrong. How do you think your body image would be if you were constantly told that you look amazing and all this great stuff? Probably, right? Now, on the other side, what happens if people in general told you that you were fat and ugly and all that good stuff over and over again? Do what? Yeah. All right. And so, I mean, you get the idea then that eventually, when, you know, regardless of what your own perceptions are of yourself, that if people keep telling you something, eventually you start believing it. This is also the same kind of premise of why, like, pathological liars can pass lie detector tests, because you tell yourself a lie so many times that you believe it, and your body physiologically responds the way that it would perceive it as the truth. If you keep hearing positive things, you have positive responses. If you keep hearing negative things, eventually you have negative responses. It's why I'm really, like, so conflicted with, you know, when I hear, say, especially with, like, say, the LGBTQ community, how one of the big phrases they have is "it gets better." And it's very conflicting to me, because you want to believe that, but at the same time, if you keep getting these negative things thrown on you, how do you believe that? So that's kind of where something like that is very conflicting, is how do we get rid of, or I don't want to say get rid of, how do we fix a problem with image issues, with you know, societal acceptance, if you don't have that level of positive acceptance for it? I know I've already talked about, like, say, the body positivity movement, and how, again, that is conflicting, because on one end, mental health is a huge component in your overall health. Having positive body image is a great thing. From a physiological perspective, if you're morbidly obese, that is not healthy. So that's why it's very conflicting, because you want both. You want to have the good mental health, you want to have the good physical health. But at the same time, if, say, my mental health breaks down to the point that I have no way to change my physical health, then they both are going to break down. So in terms of risk mitigation, body positivity is really good, because at least I have good mental health, even if my physical health is lagging behind. Does this all kind of make sense? Or am I just rambling here? All right, and then again, these are just your different kind of results you'll see on the spectrum of a bunch of different eating disorders and some different resources for you. All right, so that is everything new I had for you there. So before we review for the midterm, do you all have any questions about anything we've covered here so far? All right.